great pleasure to kick off today's first session with our first speaker. He's a real powerhouse in the realms of energy and geopolitics. As a chairman of the Independent Energy Policy Institute, he has been a powerful voice in shaping how we think about energy security and its impact on our climate. Not only is he a strategist, but also a passionate writer, with works ranging from analysis on global issues to short stories in Hindi. Please join me in welcoming Narendra Taneja.
Well, good morning. As you can see, the theme that I'm going to focus on is energy, climate, and the new world order. Of course, the core theme remains sustainability. So that remains the context. And those of you who are kind of familiar with the energy sector would know that today, practically all major global narratives are at the very basis of God, energy and climate. I mean, if you look at Ukraine very closely, what's happening there, and why is it happening, and why the United States has done the way the US has done, why Russia is responding the way it's responding, and why the US is happy that, Western Europe in particular is now kind of quite a distance away from Russia. At the core of it is energy. As you know, the Western Europe was growing very dependent on Russia for its energy requirement, oil and gas and other commodities. And then, the US was just waiting for that opportunity in the sense that, President Putin committed that mistake and he invaded Ukraine, and the result was that the US immediately seized that opportunity, and the rest is history. Western Europe, which was trying to kind of working hard on its own strategic autonomy, means emerge as a pole in the global geopolitical landscape to get away from the US in a way. But that's now all, that ambition is now behind now. So for the next 30, 40 years, Western Europe in particular is no alternative but to stay, as part of the so-called Atlantic Alliance. At the core of it is energy. As soon as you know that Ukraine happened, within 48 hours, the US imposed sanctions against Russian oil, Russian gas, and so many other things. And the reaction of Western Europe, because they have energy deficit, they needed more oil, more gas, more uranium, and so on and so forth. And then they basically start moving in the direction of Canada and the US. So their dependence on Russia yesterday is now they're dependent on America and Canada. That's exactly what the US wanted. And which means that, the Atlantic Alliance is now stronger than ever before, despite the kind of, ambition of countries like France and Germany and several others to kind of work on European strategic autonomy. That's all gone, it's all on history. Similarly, when you go for climate, we all follow climate debate very closely in our private discussions over, dinner and all that. We say, hey, look, kitni garmi pad rahi hai. And he says climate, global warming, and all that, which is true. I mean, our planet is facing existential threat. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But the narrative that only fossil fuels are responsible for that, and there is some truth in it, but that's not all truth. The fact is that, all this narrative today, global narrative on climate, that narrative is built by the West, by the rich countries, OECD countries, is disseminated by them because they control all the powerful platforms, whether it's BBC, CNN, digital platforms, so on and so forth. So the result is they want us to believe that whatever they think or they decide is actually gospel truth. And others, countries like India or Ghana or Kenya or Somalia, and that if they have any take on this, there is no truth in it. And some of you may even wonder why I'm mentioning the name of Somalia and Kenya on global issues like climate. The fact is that the wisdom is not the only prerogative of the rich countries. There are only 1.4 billion of them. And outside, in the so-called global south, we are 6.7 billion. And when it comes to issues like climate, energy, environment, we come up with our own traditions, with our own experience, with our own wisdom. But they say, no, when it comes to this climate, we know the best. So the fact is, whatever we may think, whatever we may say, the cockpit of this narrative, the decision making on issues like energy security, energy transition, climate security, and all that is with them, is with the global north. And unfortunately, many of us in our part of the world, including in New Delhi, they buy it. They think that's the best. And it's easy for them because they have resources, they offer attractive, lucrative scholarships, they fund studies conducted by Indian think tanks, Indian university, funded by them, but then you have to work as per their agenda. Otherwise, the funding stops. The scholarship is not made available. Many workshops, conferences, events take place in Delhi, Bombay, other places, funded by them. So, of course, then you have to follow their agenda. I spent 9 years of my life in Western Europe. I'm in Europe, Europe, America, Canada, these countries practically every month, attending conferences, speaking, and all that. I'm also a visiting fellow at the Oxford Institute of Energy Studies and a few others in Europe, and interact with them on a regular basis. So my sense is that energy transition, energy security, climate security, global warming. It's important that those of us in the global south, in countries like India, we come up with our own kind of ideas too, and we assert ourselves. Right now, whether we like it or not, that many of us, even in the global north, even in cities like Delhi, whatever we say, whatever we think, the fact is it's all manufactured in India. And of course, for their own reasons and in their own interest. So it's important, yes, we are facing existential threat, absolutely no doubt about it. But the way we look at it, I think is very, very Western. When I say Western, I mean the OECD countries, the rich countries. Because it works for them. It's politics. It's 99% politics. Climate agenda is 99% politics. It has very little to do with climate. Let me give you an example. Those of you who followed COP28 in the UAE, until the last day, the second last day, till 11 in the night, the reports in media, reports everywhere were that, look, they are not going to reach, it's going to be a failure or flop because we'll not be able to reach to any consensus. Overnight, within 5 hours, by 4:30 in the morning, to be precise, there was a consensus. And the consensus was that the world has to transition away from all fossil fuels, among other things. How did that happen? Who anchored it? Where exactly was the whole thing manufactured? Who pulled the strings? Who called the prime minister of this country or the president of that country? And if they didn't say yes, then tough language were used, which basically means, I'll twist your arm if you don't listen to me. I'll raise this issue. I'll raise this issue against you. And that's precisely what happened. So we need to democratize globally this debate on global warming, debate on climate security, debate on energy transition. The whole debate, discussion, therefore the narratives, are not democratic, therefore not sustainable. I had interactions with those people who actually that night, in those 4 hours, they did what they did. And I had a one-to-one discussions with them over coffee, when sometimes they can speak their mind, they can speak their heart, and they can actually share the truth. Scary. 6.7 billion people had practically no say. No say. So if that is and because it was not done in a democratic manner, so is that sustainable? And we are talking climate. We're talking climate security, something extremely serious. So therefore, Therefore, I say that, look, it's 99% politics. And we have to work to make it 99% science, not politics. Today is 99% politics, therefore it's not sustainable. Unless we agree that it has to be 99% science. And how they do it? Let me look at, for instance, weaponization of oil, gas, and nuclear power. If you look at the history, companies like ExxonMobil, Shell, British Petroleum, these were like among the top 10 companies in the world. Some of these companies were responsible for what happened to Saddam Hussein, or why, OPEC was created, or why, for instance, there have been so many wars in the Middle East. And what happened after the Ukraine? The first thing they did within 48 hours, how much you can really think through in 48 hours, even if you are a powerful country like the US? Not much. But they imposed sanctions against Russian oil and gas, weaponized it. And when we started buying from Russia, they say, hey, what are you doing? We're going to impose sanctions against you too. They couldn't afford it, thanks to China in a way, because now situation is that they need us. Same happened with gas. And by the way, for your information, I'm sure most of you know that globally, 80% energy that we consume globally in the form of electricity or oil or gas and all that is still come from fossil fuels. It's still 80.60%. Global economy, the world runs on fossil fuels. Unfortunate, bad, it contaminates, absolutely yes. But at the same time, we have 3 billion energy poor on the planet, 3 billion people. In our country, we have 700 million people who are below energy poverty line. We need to find a solution, and they are not going to do it for us. We'll have to find our own solution. Solutions built here, implemented here, in New Delhi, in Dar es Salaam, in Brasilia, in Jakarta, in Hanoi, in the global south. For that is important, we respect it. And we look at the whole thing as kind of, through. Problem is that even us, people in Delhi, if something is come from Berlin or Washington, DC or Toronto or Tokyo, we respect that. Even if it's a study by some absolutely unknown think tank or whatever. But if it's coming from Dar es Salaam or Somalia, we don't read it. We don't take it seriously. Our newspapers don't put it on the front page. That's the problem. And they take advantage of it. Now, they want status quo basically. The fact is the economic and energy gravity center, global gravity center has already moved to Asia. It has. Asia has got 4.6 billion energy consumers as a whole. They need those consumers, but they don't want any structural change. Any structural change. Let me give you an example of the UN Security Council. There are 5 permanent members. Out of these 5, 3 permanent members of the UN are from Europe. 3. Russia, France, and Britain. British economy today is smaller than us. France is the same story. Russia is just 50% of our economy today. They are there. They're all there. We are not there. And that's not only the UN Security Council. There's also COP. That's everywhere. So we have to understand nuclear power, for instance. If you are a country that the West think that is not really qualified, quote unquote, to build a nuclear power plant, they impose all kinds of things. It's completely weaponized. They decide. You are Iran, you can't have it. But you are this country, you can have it. In India, we import 87.8% of our total requirement of oil. And ours is an oil economy, whether we like it or not. Roughly 88% our requirement. We import. Natural gas, 54%. People talk about solar, renewable. But 85% equipment we use for solar power generation are coming from China and other countries. Look at our vulnerability. Nuclear power. We import significant amount of uranium. So we are absolutely dependent. And then on the top of it, so it's very easy for us, any country, to come and try to twist our arm. Say, hey, you don't listen to us, otherwise we're going to do this. Now, these are the challenges. So what, as part of the strategy, what they did, the Western countries. I'm not against West. I've spent 9 years of my life. I traveled there extensively. I'm not against any country, for that matter. But what they did, 10 years ago, they started the process that demonize oil, demonize coal, knowing that world over, the fact is 67% electricity. That's, by the way, the same electricity that's used for electric vehicles is coming from coal. Or India, when it comes to energy security, the only source of energy that's in a way we are self-reliant. Not 100%, but we are. That's coal. All other fuels we import, and heavily. We're heavily dependent on import. So in terms of energy security, the only commodity that gives us that comfort of energy security is coal. They say coal is dirty, you're polluting. So you demonize. Oil, they started demonizing. And today you go to schools in Western Europe or America, Canada, talk to kids there. They say, oh, your dad works for an oil company? You're dirty. And still the US is the biggest consumer of oil in the world, is the US. Canada is one of the biggest producers of oil, fossil fuels actually. Their economy is what is thanks to fossil fuels. So demonize it. Now there is a huge pressure on countries like India to stop using fossil fuels completely. By the way, I'm not defending fossil fuels. All I'm saying is the transition has to happen. But the transition has to happen on our terms, at our pace, based on our economics, based on what we want. We have 1.4 billion people. We're not some small country. I call it climate authoritarianism, in the sense that it's a challenge, as I said, that there is no room there for any debate on this, whether the Earth, our planet, is facing existential crisis. It is. The question is that the cockpit on how to handle it in terms of building narratives, policies, even research and development, is all with them. And they are not doing it. They basically are using it in order to maintain the status quo, global status quo in terms of the structures. Because that's how they control. That's how they can maintain the hegemony. I'm not saying that, look, they are not some saints or monks that they're going to listen to reason and all that. The fact is, if you look at the history of humankind, you need power, you need muscle, you need economic power. They're not going to respect you because you're articulate or you speak well or because you have a civilization that's 7,000 years old. Come on. They don't have any respect for all these things. So let's not waste our time. The fact is that, we need to be good in other things, otherwise we'll... So this is climate authoritarianism. It's not democratic. They decide everything and they force countries like, smaller countries in Africa, Latin America, even in Asia, to fall in line or face the consequences. Those of you who are familiar with diplomacy, how it works, sometimes I feel like writing a novel of that because I know the inside story. Horrible. Nothing to do with human rights, nothing to do with the rights of nations, or nothing, no such thing. So practically what happened that you see the new great games happening. These are like geopolitics, climate, and all these things. You see that in the Middle East, you see over Gaza, you see in Ukraine, you see, involving Russia, and now, of course, China, the US, and all that. and of course in Indian Ocean and many parts of the world. So energy, climate, and all that. But when you see it very with a microscope, the fact is that there are kind of great games going on practically everywhere. So far, what we have seen the last 30 years was a kind of unipolar world led by the US or controlled by the US or whatever. The US was the main power. So we saw some kind of stability, quote unquote stability. But now that order has collapsed. Unipolar world has collapsed. Multipolar world will take another 30 years to emerge. So between now and the next 30 years, we are going to see chaos, we're going to see disorders, we're going to see many problems, and therefore it's important that issues like energy security or climate security or sustainability, therefore, that we address them more carefully. Now, this is the second last point is unsustainable development. The model that we have, that we follow in India. This model started with the West. We know that, Europe and America, and we saw these autobahn expressways and all that. And then after that, we saw the Soviet Union, at least in terms of development, they tried to follow the same model, different ideology, but they tried to do that. Then China is a big star now. Model is all Western, is different political system, but in terms of development, what they've done is all Western. And therefore, but I think this model is not sustainable. Our Earth, the planet, just doesn't have that to sustain that kind of model for 8 billion people. Today, 8 billion is going to be 10 billion soon. So we need to find an alternative. Now, what is that? I don't think that any country is seriously interested in that. It's become a habit. The Western country, they don't want to compromise with their, way of life or with their way of thinking, or for instance, the kind of control they have over the world, resources, politics, and practically everything. The last point I'm saying that I don't think the US is going to change work on alternative model, or China, India. We're not doing that. Look what's happening up in the Himalayas, very fragile mountain, young mountains, but we are doing that. We say, the Chinese are doing that on the other side. We have no alternative to build these roads, to build this and build that. And you go to other countries, they give the same excuses or whatever you can call them. So my sense is in terms of sustainable development or sustainability or all that, the only hope is that we see some new breakthroughs in terms of technology, in terms of, some social initiatives, or in terms of some country deciding, all right, say, look, we are not going to be part of it. In small little Bhutan sometimes talk about it, but that's about it. But they also follow the Western to the same model, more or less. So I think unless there's coming a technology breakthrough, for instance, a disc on our roof works not only to collect signals for your Tata Sky, but also from the sun for power, for data, for everything. So a small disk, and that's it. You have nothing to do with powerhouse, nothing to do with all that, unless we get something like that. And the same goes for food, growing food. And the same goes, for instance, when it comes to weapons and other things. It's like a dream. At the moment, the fact is that it's all in the domain of fiction. But who knows? I'm a born optimist. I'm very optimistic that we're going to see some major breakthroughs in coming decades. There are many people working on it, many scientists working on it. There are many so-called startups and so on and so forth. So I'm very optimistic, but don't ask me the basis of my optimism. Thank you very much.